No one expected the hearing to explode like this. Not the reporters packed against the walls. Not the staffers pretending to type while secretly recording. And certainly not Karoline Leavitt, who walked in believing she could bend the entire room with nothing more than practice confidence. But everything changed the instant Jasmine Crockett lifted her eyes and met her stare. In that frozen second, before a single word left her mouth, the tension in the chamber tightened like a wire pulled too far. Phones rose into the air. Chairs stopped squeaking. The low hum of side conversations evaporated. People could feel something shifting, something raw and unfiltered, as if the truth itself was finally ready to break through the noise and declare its own name. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She didn't need theatrics. What she had was precision, sharp, steady, unshakable. She delivered 5 words that sliced straight through the fog of spin surrounding Karoline's claims. 5 words that made jaws drop before anyone even processed what had happened. For a heartbeat, the room froze around Leavitt, leaving her suspended between disbelief and panic. Her expression flickered, the confidence slipping in a way only the closest observers could detect. Jasmine held steady, her gaze unwavering, not out of hostility, but because the moment demanded truth. And truth, once summoned, does not whisper. It was dignity against deception, patience against provocation, a woman grounded in service confronting a woman grounded in spectacle. The crowd felt it. The country watching felt it. Even Leavitt, beneath the practiced posture, felt the ground shift as her narrative began to slip out of her grasp. And yet, what happened next wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision between truth and pretense, the kind that forces a nation to look up from its feet and decide what kind of story it wants to believe. Crockett didn't simply respond. She redirected the entire room, resetting the balance with a calm that felt almost defiant. And just as the room braced for her next line, just as the silence threatened to snap, another truth quietly surfaced, one that hadn't yet reached the cameras, one that would transform this tense exchange into the most memorable political takedown of the year. The moment was already electric, but what unfolded behind the scenes would push the confrontation beyond anything anyone in that chamber expected to witness. Long before Jasmine Crockett delivered the line that froze Karoline Leavitt in place, the tension had already been building like pressure under a locked lid. This wasn't an ordinary hearing, and everyone in Washington knew it. The country had been drowning in rumors, half-truths, and loud voices with louder agendas, and this chamber was supposed to be the place where clarity finally came to breathe. Instead, it had become a battleground, one where every sentence carried the weight of a nation already exhausted by distortion. For days leading up to the confrontation, Leavitt's team had flooded social media with bold declarations, clipped videos, and carefully staged confidence. Her followers amplified every claim, every oversimplified talking point, stitching them into a story designed to provoke rather than enlighten. By the time she stepped into the room, her narrative was already circulating like wildfire, and she believed it made her untouchable. She believed the repetition of her claims made them real. But beneath that noise, another current was flowing, quiet at first, but steady and growing. People had begun asking questions. They wanted the truth, not the packaged version curated for outrage. They wanted someone who could cut through the fog with clarity instead of theatrics. And whether the nation realized it or not, that desire had been building toward this exact moment, toward a woman who didn't rely on performance, but on presence. That woman was Jasmine Crockett. She walked into the chamber not just as a representative, but as someone carrying the expectations of a country tired of being misled. To many watching, especially immigrants, minorities, and marginalized communities, she represented something deeper, the belief that dignity could still stand tall in a room filled with people who treated facts like negotiable props. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was integrity, the kind that grows from surviving storms much harsher than a televised confrontation. And that's what made the moment so much bigger than 2 opposing arguments. It wasn't about a single policy dispute or a headline-grabbing accusation. It was about who America trusted to define reality. Was it the loudest voice in the room, or the clearest one, Was truth determined by confidence or by character? As the hearing progressed, every exchange pushed the stakes higher. Reporters outside refreshed their feeds, sensing something seismic brewing inside. Families at home streamed the session, whispering to each other, weighing every expression, every interruption, every tremor in each voice. The nation wasn't just watching, they were choosing sides. And with every passing minute, one thing became unmistakably clear. Leavitt wasn't there to offer clarity. She was there to dominate the narrative, even if it meant warping it. Her certainty felt less like conviction and more like performance, like someone clinging to a script even as the story around her began falling apart. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett sat still, listening carefully, letting the noise wash over her without letting it distort her focus. She knew the truth didn't need to shout. It only needed the right moment to be revealed. And as the hearing tightened into a single, rising pulse, that moment was rapidly approaching. The room could feel it. Viewers online could feel it. Even Leavitt, despite her rehearsed bravado, could feel the ground under her beginning to shift. But no one, not a single person in that chamber, understood how high the stakes truly were. Because just minutes before the cameras captured the explosion heard around the country, something else happened. Something small, quiet, and almost invisible. And it was the spark that turned this tense hearing into the biggest political takedown of the year. Karoline Leavitt entered every room carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had memorized the script of power long before the audience even arrived. Her posture, her gestures, even the slight tilt of her chin had been honed to convey authority, to suggest that her arguments were untouchable. But beneath that polished exterior was a story far less heroic than the image she projected, a story of ambition shadowed by overreach, of charisma built on repetition rather than substance. Leavitt's rise had been swift, fueled by media soundbites and viral moments that painted her as a prodigy of political instincts. To casual observers, she seemed untouchable, a young figure commanding the room with apparent mastery, delivering statements that sounded bold, confident, and undeniable. But insiders whispered differently. Every confident proclamation often masked a lack of grounding. Every performance had cracks that careful observers could trace if they looked closely. Her past controversies, subtle yet telling, revealed a pattern. She had repeatedly leaned into narratives designed for optics, not for truth. In previous public appearances, she would launch sweeping accusations, deflect responsibility with practiced ease, and rely on rapid-fire repetition to overwhelm audiences. Facts were convenient tools, not anchors. Her approach relied less on substance and more on creating an illusion that her dominance was inevitable. In this chamber, that history mattered. Every journalist, every staffer, every viewer online carried the memory of her past missteps, yet many hadn't seen her pushed to the edge of her performance before. The confidence she displayed was a shield, but shields have edges, and her armor had already shown faint cracks. The problem, from Leavitt's perspective, was that she had underestimated the person sitting across from her. Karoline thrived when others accepted the narrative she offered. She had mastered the art of turning a hearing, a debate, or a media appearance into a theater where she controlled the stage, the timing, and the reactions. But this was different. Crockett was not an audience member to be swayed. She was not a participant to be manipulated. She was someone who could see through the performance and respond with precision rather than emotion. And for Leavitt, that distinction was invisible until it was too late. Even her supporters, conditioned to applaud at every confident line, sensed the subtle shift in energy the moment Crockett entered the room. Their cheers, once automatic, now hesitated as if sensing the possibility that the narrative they had been repeating might unravel. Karoline, sensing a slight unease, tried to reinforce her dominance with sharp words, clipped sentences, and carefully timed interruptions. But the cracks beneath her surface, the foundation built on optics rather than integrity, were beginning to show. And it was not just the audience outside the chamber who could sense it. Inside, every aide, every note-taker, every counsel knew that Leavitt's strategy relied on overconfidence and control. Watching Crockett's calm, unwavering presence, Some began to wonder if this was the first time she had encountered someone capable of dismantling her with nothing more than poise and clarity. The arrogance that had carried her through previous confrontations now faced its first true test. Yet, the world rarely sees the slow unmasking of a figure like Leavitt. It is easy to admire the confidence, to assume mastery, to take the polished veneer at face value. Few pause to notice the inconsistencies, the rehearsed overstatements, the slight flinches behind the practiced smile. But today, everything would be exposed. Today, what had been hidden in plain sight, every misstep, every overconfidence, every reliance on appearances over truth, would be laid bare. The audience, the nation watching from screens large and small, was unaware that the stage had already been set for a moment that would redefine the conversation about credibility, power, and integrity. And Karoline, blinded by her own certainty, had yet to realize that her very strengths, her confidence, her stagecraft, her relentless energy, were about to become liabilities. Because in the very next moments, as the cameras rolled and the room held its collective breath, Jasmine Crockett would not just respond. She would expose the full extent of Leavitt's cracks with precision, patience, and undeniable authority. And when she did, the performance that had seemed untouchable for so long would begin to collapse, leaving the nation to witness a dismantling of arrogance by calm truth. Jasmine Crockett didn't walk into that hearing by accident. Every step of her journey had led to this room, to this confrontation, to this exact moment when truth would face performance and integrity would confront spectacle. She was not born into privilege, nor did she inherit influence. She had built her path through resilience, through sacrifice, and through a commitment to a vision of leadership that placed service above applause. From her earliest years, Crockett understood struggle. Growing up in communities where voices were too often ignored, where the systems in place seemed designed to leave people behind, she learned that courage wasn't loud. It was persistent. It was waking up every day determined to make a difference even when recognition was absent. It was listening when others shouted, advocating when others retreated, and choosing principles over popularity at every turn. Her journey through education, public service, and political arenas was marked by both triumph and challenge. She faced criticism that tested her resolve, skepticism that questioned her capability, and moments when the odds stacked so heavily against her that stepping back seemed easier. Yet, she pressed forward, not for herself alone, but for those who rarely saw their concerns reflected in leadership. This wasn't ambition for status. It was ambition for impact, for dignity, for justice. Crockett's experiences shaped not just her intellect but her character. She had navigated complex policy issues with an eye for fairness, defended underrepresented communities with unshakable resolve, and built coalitions that trusted her to speak for truth even when it was inconvenient. These weren't just professional accomplishments. They were the proof of a mindset forged by challenge, sharpened by responsibility, and sustained by purpose. When the moment came to face Karoline Leavitt, all of these experiences converged. Crockett didn't approach the hearing as a spectacle, as an opportunity for theatrics, or as a stage for performative bravado. She approached it as a test of values, a platform to affirm that leadership grounded in integrity could prevail even against the loudest, most polished opposition. The room itself became a canvas on which her life's work, every decision, every hardship, every lesson, would paint a story of clarity and resilience. Her preparation was meticulous. She had studied Leavitt's past statements, anticipated the likely manipulations, and fortified herself against every distraction. But beyond preparation, Crockett relied on an inner steadiness that came from years of facing challenges far more personal than political soundbites. She understood that true power was not in dominating a conversation, but in commanding it with calm, intelligence, and purpose. Her presence alone, measured and deliberate, began to influence the room long before a single rebuttal left her lips. And yet, Crockett's story resonated far beyond the walls of that chamber. To viewers watching from homes across the country, she represented more than a politician winning a debate. She embodied possibility, the idea that heritage, identity, and lived experience could be assets rather than limitations. For immigrant communities, for those who had felt sidelined, for anyone who had ever been underestimated, Crockett's very presence was a validation that dignity, preparation, and perseverance could confront arrogance and succeed. This was a woman who had faced the storm and emerged not hardened in bitterness, but tempered in courage. Her ability to remain composed, to assess, to respond with precision, reflected a life lived in service of others, a life that demanded excellence not for recognition but for justice. Every word she spoke, every pause she took, every measured gaze at her opponent carried the weight of a journey defined by sacrifice, vision, and unwavering integrity. As the cameras rolled and the room's collective breath held steady, it was clear that Crockett's preparation, her history, and her moral clarity had primed her for this confrontation in a way that no amount of rehearsed bravado from Leavitt could match. The stage was set, the stakes were high, and the moment of reckoning approached. Crockett's life had been a series of tests, and this was the culmination, a test not only of her intellect, but of her ability to embody the principle she had lived by in front of a nation watching every word, every glance, every silent gesture. And as the room waited, as the audience leaned in and the nation's eyes turned toward the unfolding drama, one truth became undeniable. Jasmine Crockett was not just ready. She was inevitable, and when the first words left her lips, the country would feel the weight of a lifetime of preparation, integrity, and courage converging in a single, transformative moment. The moment the hearing officially began, the air in the chamber thickened, heavy with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt wasted no time, launching into her rehearsed statements with the precision of someone who believed that repetition could substitute for reality. Her voice, measured yet forceful, carried over the room as if each word were a hammer striking at the walls of truth. Yet, beneath her polished cadence, subtle cracks began to form. Hesitations too brief to be noticed by the untrained eye, glances flickering toward aides as if seeking reassurance for claims she could no longer fully own. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, listened. She allowed Leavitt's statements to fill the space, not as an opportunity to respond immediately, but to absorb, to analyze, to identify the weaknesses in the narrative that the world was being sold. Every exaggeration, every logical gap, every emotionally manipulative flourish was catalogued in real time. Crockett's stillness was disarming. It created a subtle pressure that made the room lean in, as if the audience itself were waiting for her to act with the inevitability of a storm about to break. As Leavitt intensified her attacks, attempting to dominate the conversation through volume and bravado, a visible shift occurred. Her energy, once commanding, now bordered on frantic. She interrupted, repeated points that had already been refuted, and relied on theatrics to mask uncertainty. The microphone became her instrument, but instead of amplifying control, it began to expose tension, each rising inflection betraying the cracks in her performance. Crockett's responses were measured, precise, and deliberate. She corrected misstatements with calm authority, posed questions that highlighted inconsistencies, and employed pauses that drew attention to the gaps in Leavitt's logic. With each measured sentence, the contrast became clearer, one voice driven by integrity and preparation, the other by image and repetition. The audience could sense it, both in the room and through the screens streaming the hearing nationwide. Whispered reactions, hushed gasps, and murmurs of agreement rippled through those watching, the emotional tide subtly turning in favor of Crockett's composure and clarity. Even the press, typically impartial observers, could not ignore the tension escalating. Reporters leaned forward, pencils poised, fingers hovering over keyboards, capturing the precise moment when arrogance began to buckle under scrutiny. Every side glance between Leavitt and her aides revealed growing anxiety. The rehearsed lines that had once seemed untouchable now felt brittle under the weight of Crockett's calm dismantling. And yet, Crockett did not rush. She allowed the tension to build, understanding that in drama, as in politics, timing was everything. Each interruption from Leavitt, each attempt to regain control, only amplified the suspense. The nation, watching in living rooms, offices, and cafes, could feel the stakes rising. This was more than a debate. It was a test of character, a battle over who could define the narrative, and a demonstration of what it meant to lead with dignity under fire. Then came the turning point within the escalation. Leavitt made a pointed accusation, one calculated to provoke an immediate reaction. But Crockett remained calm, her gaze steady, her voice even. She allowed the word to hang in the air for a heartbeat longer than expected, forcing the room to acknowledge the audacity of the claim before systematically unraveling it. The contrast was stark, one woman flailing, the other controlled, deliberate, and unflinchingly confident. The tension reached its apex when Crockett, having absorbed and analyzed every tactic, prepared to strike. The audience leaned forward, the cameras captured every subtle movement, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The room was taut, the silence almost unbearable, as if time itself had paused to witness the culmination of preparation against posturing. And just when it seemed the debate could escalate no further, a subtle but unmistakable change occurred in Leavitt's demeanor. The rehearsed certainty faltered, her words lost momentum, and her carefully constructed persona began to crack. The room could feel it. The nation could feel it. The stage was set, and the moment of reckoning was about to arrive. Because the next words Jasmine Crockett would speak would not just answer, not just counter, they would redefine the conversation entirely. And when she finally spoke, the impact would be felt not only in that chamber but across a country ready for clarity, truth, and dignity to triumph. The room fell silent as Jasmine Crockett finally leaned forward, her composure absolute, her gaze locked on Karoline Leavitt. There was no flourish, no dramatic gesture, just the quiet certainty of someone who had lived every word she was about to speak. Every camera, every eye, every heartbeat seemed to converge on that single moment. The nation watching from living rooms, offices, and screens across the country collectively held its breath. Leavitt's mouth opened, ready to fire another rehearsed volley. But Crockett's calm interrupted the rhythm. Her voice, steady and deliberate, began to dismantle the narrative point by point. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't resort to theatrics. She spoke with clarity so piercing that every misstatement, every manipulation, every attempt at obfuscation was exposed in the light of unshakable truth. "Let's examine the claims you've presented," Crockett began, each word deliberate, almost surgical. She highlighted inconsistencies in Leavitt's record, citing specifics with precise references. When Leavitt attempted to interrupt, Crockett held her gaze, allowing the silence to amplify the weight of his statements. The room leaned forward. Staffers paused mid-note-taking. Even the most distracted reporters felt the electricity of a confrontation where facts, integrity, and logic were deployed like instruments of undeniable force. Crockett's approach was methodical. She didn't rely on theatrical glaze or dramatic outbursts. Instead, she created a crescendo of clarity. One by one, Leavitt's talking points were deconstructed. Her timeline contradicted her previous statements. Her statistics were cherry-picked and misleading. Her appeals to emotion, once seemingly compelling, now sounded hollow against Crockett's calm authority. The effect was immediate. The rehearsed confidence that had dominated her public appearances began to crumble in plain view. Social media reactions erupted almost instantly. Clips of Crockett's measured takedown began circulating before the hearing even concluded. Memes highlighting the contrast between calm reason and frantic posturing spread like wildfire. Viewers shared reactions along with commentary about integrity, truth, and leadership. For those who had felt silenced or overlooked in the political discourse, Crockett's performance was validation, a reminder that patience, preparation, and dignity could outmatch brashness and pretense. And still, Crockett didn't rush. She knew timing was everything. Each pause, each carefully measured response allowed the audience, both inside the chamber and outside, to process, to internalize, to feel the impact of each revelation. She let the gravity of her words settle over Leavitt, forcing the other woman into a reactive, defensive posture. The contrast was undeniable, one poised, unshakable, commanding respect, the other increasingly flustered, searching for footing, faltering under scrutiny. Then came the moment that would be replayed countless times across news feeds and social media. A line so precise, so devastating, that it reduced Leavitt's defense to fragments. "Facts are not optional," Crockett said, her tone calm but absolute. "Truth is not a performance, and integrity is not negotiable." The words echoed, not as an attack, but as an affirmation of the value she embodied. Leavitt, momentarily speechless, felt the room tilt under the weight of their significance. Crockett pressed on, dismantling the final threads of Leavitt's narrative with methodical precision. She referenced verified records, pointed out contradictions, and, most importantly, did so without descending into theatrics. The authority she exuded was not born of aggression but of mastery. Every pause became a hammer blow, every carefully chosen word a scalpel revealing the gaps in a carefully constructed facade. The audience in the room shifted, leaning in, some whispering in awe, others exchanging glances as realization dawned. Outside, viewers followed the live stream with bated breath, their notifications exploding with commentary, clips, and analysis. Every reaction reinforced the magnitude of Crockett's achievement. She had not only defended her position, but had reshaped the narrative, turning the chamber into a theater where integrity and truth triumphed over pretense and bravado. Even Leavitt's supporters, trained to cheer at any sign of assertiveness, faltered. They had expected a controlled debate, a display of polished rhetoric, perhaps a minor victory in public perception. Instead, they witnessed a dismantling so complete, so calm, and so undeniable that doubt crept in. The rehearsed talking points crumbled. The confident mask slipped, and the audience, both in the chamber and online, collectively recognized the moment for what it was, a masterclass in measured, moral, and strategic confrontation. And as Crockett delivered the final pieces of her counterargument, the room seemed to collectively exhale. Her words had landed with precision, her logic unassailable, her composure unwavering. She had turned the entire confrontation into a lesson not just about policy or debate tactics, but about leadership, character, and the power of preparation. Yet the echo of her mic drop moment extended beyond the chamber. Social media would erupt, commentators would analyze every sentence, and the nation would witness a rare spectacle. Arrogance confronted with patience, spin confronted with truth, performance confronted with integrity. The impact was immediate, visceral, and undeniable. And while Leavitt grappled with the reality of her unraveling performance, a subtle truth lingered in the charged silence of the room. This was more than a political takedown. It was a statement about what leadership could be when grounded in dignity, knowledge, and unshakable clarity. And as the cameras continued to roll, everyone watching understood that the confrontation had reached a moment from which there could be no turning back, where the nation itself could witness the triumph of moral authority over manufactured confidence. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words landed, the chamber seemed to vibrate with a new energy, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of her precision and clarity. Reporters scrambled to capture reactions, staffers whispered to one another, and Leavitt, for the first time, sat frozen, her rehearsed confidence nowhere to be found. But the real shockwave traveled far beyond that room. Across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens, hearts racing, fingers hovering over keyboards, knowing that what they had just witnessed was extraordinary. Within minutes, the first clips hit social media. The segment of Crockett calmly dismantling Leavitt's talking points was shared across X, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, spreading like wildfire. Hashtags ignited, #CrockettClarity, #Truth over spin, #Dignity wins. Memes began to form almost instantly, side-by-side frames contrasting Crockett's composure with Leavitt's flustered attempts to regain control. Every post carried the same sense of awe, admiration, and disbelief. How could one person so effortlessly expose lies while remaining unwaveringly dignified? The reactions didn't stop at social media. Journalists and political commentators began posting live reactions, framing the exchange as a turning point in how debates could, and should, be conducted. Headlines raced across news feeds. Jasmine Crockett redefines political confrontation, Leavitt's confidence crumbles under Crockett's precision. Truth wins the day. Analysis flooded in, dissecting every pause, every phrase, and every calculated inflection, emphasizing how Crockett's calm authority had shifted the narrative instantly. Even celebrities and influencers with no political affiliation weighed in, amplifying the story to audiences who might not have tuned into the hearing otherwise. Their posts praised Crockett's poise and preparation, highlighting the emotional and intellectual contrast between hero and antagonist. Across the nation, people shared their personal interpretations. Parents noting how Crockett's calm composure modeled integrity for their children, students commenting on the importance of preparation and critical thinking, and immigrant communities expressing pride in seeing someone who represented perseverance, dignity, and purpose triumph so publicly. Meanwhile, Leavitt struggled to regain control. Her aides whispered rapidly, attempting damage control, but the viral nature of Crockett's performance had already outpaced them. Clips were edited and shared within minutes, led with text, commentary, and emojis emphasizing the irony of her unraveling confidence. Even those who had initially supported her could not ignore the stark contrast. Every gesture, every flinch, every hesitation amplified by the nationwide scrutiny. The broader political landscape felt the ripple effect immediately. Talk shows debated the implications. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing Crockett's methodical dismantling, and commentators speculated on how this confrontation would influence future hearings, campaigns, and public expectations. Across the board, there was agreement. This wasn't simply a debate. It was a demonstration of the power of integrity and preparation in the face of arrogance and spin. For everyday viewers, the resonance was deeply personal. Many saw in Crockett's performance the embodiment of values they held dear. Truth over manipulation, courage over fear, service over spectacle. Social media threads swelled with personal reflections. People shared stories of overcoming challenges, of standing up to unfairness, and of learning from Crockett's example. It became more than a political moment. It became a cultural touchstone, a collective experience where audiences felt validated, inspired, and emotionally connected. Even newsrooms noted a subtle but profound shift. Viewership had spiked not merely because of controversy, but because the story carried emotional weight. People wanted to witness integrity confronting falsehoods. They wanted to feel the tension of a high-stakes confrontation where dignity won, and they wanted to share that feeling with others. Every like, retweet, and share reinforced a sense of community around these shared values, magnifying Crockett's influence far beyond the hearing itself. Yet, amid the viral frenzy, one truth remained undeniable. The confrontation had exposed something deeper. It wasn't just about who won the debate or whose talking points survived scrutiny. It was about showing a nation that poise, preparation, and moral clarity could command attention, shape narratives, and inspire action. And while the world processed what they had seen, a quiet but persistent anticipation hung in the air, an awareness that the story was far from over, that the next chapter would reveal the full consequences, and that the impact of Crockett's performance would continue to ripple in ways no one yet fully understood. The digital landscape had already transformed into a theater of validation and reflection, a place where millions were absorbing, reacting, and internalizing the triumph of dignity over deceit. And as the chamber emptied, the nation's attention remained fixed, waiting for the final moral reckoning, the lessons, and the resolution that would emerge from a confrontation that had already captured history. The room finally exhaled. Cameras continued to click, reporters scribbled notes, and the air still thrummed with the aftershocks of what had just transpired. But beyond the immediate spectacle, beyond the viral clips and social media frenzy, a deeper truth had emerged. Dignity, preparation, and unwavering integrity were not just abstract ideals. They were forces capable of reshaping perceptions, influencing a nation, and defining history. Jasmine Crockett had done more than dismantle Karoline Leavitt's narrative. She had delivered a demonstration of moral clarity so profound that it transcended the political theater. For viewers, her performance became a symbol of what leadership could and should be, a steadfast commitment to truth, a refusal to compromise principles, and the courage to confront falsehood with calm precision. Crockett had proven that power need not be loud to be formidable. The conviction need not be aggressive to be undeniable. The lesson resonated immediately. Across the nation, ordinary citizens felt validated in their desire for honesty and integrity. Communities that had long felt sidelined watched as someone who represented perseverance, diligence, and moral fortitude held the line for truth. For immigrants and marginalized groups in particular, Crockett embodied the principle that identity, struggle, and preparation could be harnessed to effect real change, even in arenas dominated by spectacle and performance. She had shown that standing firm in one's values could reverberate far beyond any single debate. Crockett herself remained composed, but the weight of the moment was clear in her measured responses and reflective expressions. She didn't gloat, she didn't celebrate. Instead, she reframed the confrontation as an opportunity to teach that civility, diligence, and principled action were far more impactful than anger, rhetoric, or fleeting confidence. Each word she had delivered was part of a larger message to the country. That leadership grounded in truth and service creates not only victories in the moment, but a legacy that inspires trust and admiration. The nation, watching from every corner, absorbed that message. Social media threads that had erupted with shock and excitement slowly evolved into discussions about ethics, responsibility, and civic duty. Commentators highlighted how Crockett's approach offered a roadmap for how public discourse could return to reasoned debate rather than spectacle. Conversations spread in classrooms, offices, and living rooms. Parents encouraged children to emulate preparation over bravado. Students discussed strategy rooted in patience and principle, and activists found renewed energy in seeing values enacted so visibly and effectively. Even Karoline Leavitt, confronted with the consequences of overconfidence and manipulation, became a cautionary example. Her unraveling highlighted that charisma without substance is fleeting, that theatrics may capture attention but cannot sustain influence, and that authenticity and moral clarity ultimately hold more weight than any rehearsed narrative. In this contrast, the moral lesson crystallized. The world rewards those who align words with action, who prioritize truth over optics, and who confront adversity with calm determination rather than desperation. Crockett's performance, while dramatic, was also profoundly human. It reminded viewers that leadership is not about dominance. It is about responsibility. It is about courage that stems from preparation, empathy, and integrity. And most importantly, it reinforced that victories achieved through principles, not manipulation, resonate far longer than any viral moment. The applause, the clips, the social media waves, they were all temporary. The values she embodied were timeless. As the chamber emptied and the echoes of the confrontation faded, the nation's attention lingered. People reflected not only on what had been said, but on what had been demonstrated, that courage, dignity, and truth could topple arrogance, that one person, grounded in preparation and principle, could shift the conversation, and that integrity, once acted upon decisively, inspires trust, loyalty, and admiration on a scale no spectacle can match. And so, as the day drew to a close, the moral clarity of the moment remained. Jasmine Crockett had not merely won a debate. She had delivered a masterclass in leadership, a testament to perseverance, and an inspiring affirmation that in the battle between truth and deception, dignity always prevails. For the viewers who watched, shared, and internalized the story, the message was unmistakable. Integrity is powerful, preparation is unstoppable, and standing firm in your principles can reshape not just a hearing, but the hearts and minds of a nation. The world had witnessed a confrontation, but what it learned extended far beyond politics. It was a lesson in courage, a reminder of the value of moral clarity, and a call to action, to act with integrity, to speak with conviction, and to trust that truth, when wielded wisely and bravely, will always leave a lasting impact. As the cameras powered down and the chamber emptied, the reverberations of the confrontation continued to echo far beyond the walls. Jasmine Crockett's performance had already become the defining moment of the day, capturing attention not only for the dramatic takedown but for the principles she embodied: truth, dignity, and moral courage. For viewers across the nation, this was more than a political spectacle. It was a reaffirmation of the values that give leadership its power and authenticity. The lessons of the hearing were clear. Confidence alone cannot sustain influence. Preparation, clarity, and integrity are the forces that endure. Crockett had demonstrated that calm authority can dismantle arrogance, that careful reasoning can silence manipulation, and that one person, grounded in principles and purpose, can transform a narrative and inspire an entire nation. This was not just a victory in debate. It was a moment of validation for anyone who has ever felt underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked. And now, the story is not over. The impact of Crockett's words continues to ripple, shaping conversations, inspiring dialogue, and reminding citizens that truth and integrity are not abstract ideals. They are tools of empowerment. Each viewer who witnessed the dismantling of falsehoods carries that lesson forward, spreading it in conversations, online discussions, and personal actions. So take this moment to reflect, to engage, and to act. Share this story with others who need to see that courage can triumph over deception. Let it inspire your own voice, your own preparation, and your own commitment to standing firm in your principles. Subscribe, comment, and be part of a community that values integrity, celebrates clarity, and believes that truth, when wielded wisely, always wins. The confrontation may have ended, but the message, dignity over deception, courage over fear, truth over spectacle, remains, waiting for each of us to carry it forward.